You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
Alrighty, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Derek, and joined as always by your co-hosts, Kevin and Alex. Gentlemen, how we doing?
Doing good, man. Doing good. Another wonderful Tuesday night. We are inching closer to the NFL season here as camp is fully underway for all 32 NFL teams. We got a couple holdouts. We got some hold-ins, and we got a whole lot of beat writers just spamming the Ethernet for clicks right now. So
yes,
in their football this week. I think there's a football game this week.
Is it this week or next? I don't know. I don't pay attention to the Hall of Fame game.
I don't either because nobody's playing in it. I saw that. I saw Caleb Williams is not playing in that Hall of Fame game. None of the Bears starters are going to be playing in that. I'm checked out, though, from football for the next couple of weeks because the Olympics are on. And what have you guys been watching any Olympics yet so far?
So there was some on the television at the restaurant Bailey and I went to dinner tonight at, and it was doubles table tennis.
Yeah, I was watching that too. Mixed doubles table tennis.
Okay. That is not an Olympic sport. And this is why I have completely lost interest and faith in most of the Olympic games. The swimming, the gymnastics is completely fun to watch, right? But I mean, this is not an Olympic sport, guys. This is like cornhole. Like, this is what you do when you're drunk in the backyard with your friends. And then you just add the little, what was it, the Russian table tennis, right? Where, you score and you get to slap it at someone's chest and call it good. Like, this isn't a sport. Come on, get out of here with this nonsense. We are comparing these people and putting them in the same breath as Jokic and Simone Biles and all these other great athletes. Like, these people aren't athletes. They have really good eye-hand coordination. That's it.
You and my wife would get along great because I put on mixed doubles table tennis, the gold medal game, by the way, and gold medal match. And I looked over at her and I was like, "You're not interested in mixed doubles table tennis?" She's like, "No, I'd rather watch anything else." I've been locked in. Shout out to the men's gymnastic team, more so the U.S. men's gymnastic team, more so that dude. His name is Steve. I don't want to attempt his last name because I'll get it wrong. But he is Pommel Horse Guy. Are you guys familiar with Pommel Horse Guy?
I watched that the other day. That dude.
Kevin, if you don't know about Pommel Horse Guy, here's what Pommel Horse Guy does. He shows up, does the pommel horse, and that's it. But he does the pommel horse so well that it gave the U.S. men's gymnastic team a bronze medal in the team competition because he can do that so well. That's like literally all he does is pommel horse, and he's so good at it that it got us a bronze medal. So
here's my thought around the pommel horse. I think any 13-year-old can do the pommel horse, but the rings
are
what impressed me.
Yeah,
the rings truly impressed me with the shoulder strength and then being able to go straight out and what, like,
that iron cross. I can't even do that on the ground. Like, I just holding my arms out like this, I can't even do that for like 5 seconds. That's too much.
Like the pommel horse, I look at it and go, yeah, that's cool, but I'm pretty sure my kid can do a lot of that. Like, maybe not that fast, but they can spin around on their hands and do some of that fun stuff. Like, yeah, these are grown men, so it's kind of cool, but a 13-year-old, I don't know a 13-year-old that can do that ring exercise. Those are stinking impressive, man.
Yeah. Although to Alex's point, pommel horse guy, gets up there, has the big like rim horn type of glasses.
He is Clark Kent.
Yep, literally
rips those bad boys off
and just goes.
Superman's his way in, does his routine. I'm not going to say what I said aloud today, but he just F's S up and gets on his way, grabs the medal, and he's out the door.
Yeah.
I want my medal. I want my Coors Light, and I'm going home. I trained 4 years for this. I crushed it, and I'm out.
Yeah. It's so good. It's so good.
But you can't take it away from him, right? Like, he's forever a Olympian medalist, right?
Yeah.
Olympic medalist. There we go.
Anyways,
so, kudos to the guys.
Huge national pride over the next 2 weeks because USA. I just randomly break out USA chants while I'm at work. It's great.
There you go. Alrighty. Any other thoughts here before we start kind of diving in and you're getting into some of these player breakdowns here? Any additional news notes we want to hit up, or any other thoughts before we start diving into this?
No, I think there were a few big signings. I think since we last spoke, Tua got paid. I think that happened since we last spoke. I'm seeing now that is it DJ Moore getting a 4-year, $110 million extension with Chicago. That's nice. That now puts him third behind Justin Jefferson and AJ Brown. So Chicago seems to be thinking that this is going to be the group that does it for them, because they're certainly investing like it.
Right. Apparently Dallas has sent a new contract offer over to CD. So who knows? Maybe we'll see this holdout end there.
Maybe
we could. I doubt it, but we could.
Thought it was Jordan Love got paid too, right? Yep.
That's the other one.
Got paid, then Jordan Love went right up over the top of it.
Oh.
Yeah. So
we'll see a few more. Yeah, we'll see a few more contracts get handed out. There's always like the weird surprise one. I think the Broncos have kind of already done their weird surprise one with the Quinn Miners, right? Like there's always just that one that you're like, that's where we're spending our money this year. Okay. All right. Like that's fine. But okay. That happens. It seems like it for every team at every training camp where some player that is a solid piece of their rotation gets paid like superstar money. And it's just like, okay, that's where you're going to spend your money this year. Okay. All right.
Fair enough. Terry has a question coming in here. Does DJ's Moore deal impact his fantasy status in y'all's opinion? For me, it does not.
No.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think he was still going to be the number one in Chicago.
Right.
Keenan Allen is obviously going to do his thing. So we're probably not going to see the consecutive like boom weeks that we saw out of DJ Moore last year, but I think consistently he'll get there. I don't see Chicago successfully pounding the rock. How about that? Like they may want to run the ball and take some off of Caleb Williams. I do not see them successfully pounding the rock. I see them trailing in a lot of football games. So I think DJ Moore is absolutely there. It might be a little uglier, but honestly, the Bears were trailing a lot of games last year. Like, and he got fed, and I don't think that there's anybody contesting the fact that they believe that Caleb Williams is a better thrower of the football than Justin Fields. So if Justin Fields was able to find that rapport with DJ Moore, who is seemingly quarterback proof at this point, because he played with some not great quarterbacks in Carolina, to now have the number one overall draft pick in Caleb Williams, throwing him the ball, you get past the first couple weeks and they get in game time rhythm. I think he'll be just fine. So the first couple weeks might be a little shaky as they're kind of feeling each other out and they're getting their rhythm and timing kind of to perfection, with it being live bullets, if you will. But after that, I think he'll be fine, Terry. I don't think you have anything to worry about.
Right. All righty. Well, let's should we go ahead and dive on into our running back breakdowns?
Let's do it.
All right. Let's go ahead and start off with Javonte Williams, who's coming off the board kind of in that 30th running back off the board. But last season, Javonte Williams, 217 attempts, 774 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, an additional 47 receptions on 58 targets and 228 yards, and 2 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Javonte Williams?
So I think Javonte is going to have a bounce back year. I think that he was coming back from a knee injury that was a little bit more severe than what was ever let on. And he was asked to step into this Denver backfield and really kind of had to anchor the way, if you will, right? Samaje was not used in the running game at all. Jaleel McLaughlin definitely filled in, but was more of that change of pace. He was the exciting, different type of back, but they leaned on Javonte a good amount last year, and his knee probably wasn't quite 100%. So I think he will be better this year. I think he's a nice value right now with where he's going. When we set all these, he was going 30th running back off the board and 98 overall. I think he surpasses that. Like, I think he gets into RB2 territory. Now, whether he finishes at 24, 17, I think a lot of that's going to be how he falls into the end zone, and those are really difficult to predict. But for where he's going, I think he's going to see the majority of the carries in the Denver backfield this season. And with the new offensive coordinator that they have there in Denver, he should assume a role that leads towards fantasy production. So I think you get him at a great value for being basically your RB3 or RB4, kind of depending on how you're drafting and everything else. I think he works out for you. So he's a guy that I am looking at kind of in those mid rounds if I'm looking to solidify my running back position with some depth where I know volume, or I guess share of a backfield is going to be leaning in my favor, if you will. I do like Javonte. I think there's some good value there.
Yeah, I think there is value there, but I'm a little concerned about his production. I mean, it was not great last year. Carries were up, yards were down, yards per carry obviously went down. From I'm only comparing to his rookie season where he really burst onto the scene. Touchdowns about equal. Passing work was right around the same. Again, yards were down, receptions were up. So, like, while he was being utilized, right, he was getting the ball. He wasn't able to take advantage of that opportunity every time that he could. So I'm a little concerned about that. I know that, yes, he was maybe not Sean Payton's favorite running back. I think Jaleel McLaughlin was maybe Sean Payton's little gem of a water bug that he liked running around back there. I think there is value here, but I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not putting all my eggs in the Javonte Williams basket. That's probably if he's there, I'll take a long, hard look at him and see what else is available to me. And if I am running back hungry, which typically we are in these leagues, he's a good option.
Okay. Fair enough. So I can certainly, if you had asked me about my Javonte Williams take probably about 3 weeks ago, I was very out on Javonte Williams. Certainly have kind of come around on this one recently, right? Like, there was a lot of reports throughout the summer that Javonte may be fighting for a roster spot at that point coming into this season, right? Whereas reports coming out of camp, the reports are very glowing that he's looking good and that he's looking like somewhat of what we used to see in Juggernaut Javonte, right? Like, there is some of that's coming back, and that knee injury was certainly a massive one. And typically when you see guys coming back off of an ACL, that first season isn't necessarily the season that you want to, kind of hit your wagon to, right? It's that season after, the comeback from the injury too. So, and that would be this season. And I think that we're going to see some good things there. But Alex, you're right. Javonte last season was, from an efficiency standpoint, was not very good. And I think that we'll see some of that bounce back. We'll see some of the efficiency come back here as well. I do think that we may see him competing for touches a little bit, but definitely getting the early down, short yardage type of work in this offense.
One final note, and I'm sorry that my connection was a little rough there at the end of my point. But one final note: Denver's schedule is not great. It's while the teams may not be the best, may not be the most difficult. There's some tough stretches in here, particularly week 3 and 4 at Tampa Bay, at New York Jets. They got a short week where they're home against Los Angeles, and then they're at New Orleans for their Thursday night game in week 7. The bye week for Denver isn't until week 14, which also means that the bye week for Denver is in week 14. And that's right in playoff time. So this is very difficult this year with they moving all these bye weeks way back. It's going to be challenging for fantasy players because that's usually right. Week 14 is week 1 or week 2 of your playoffs.
Usually
and to have guys
the last
guys
week of
on
the
a
regular
bye.
season.
Oh, okay. Sometimes.
Usually you got 15, 16, 17 anymore with it being an 18-week schedule.
That's fair. But it's right there where, you're in a push and this guy's not available.
It's fair. All righty. Any other thoughts on Javonte Williams? All righty. Let's go ahead and hit up Tony Pollard. And Tony Pollard last year with Dallas, 252 rush attempts, 1,005 yards, 6 touchdowns on the ground, 55 receptions, 67 targets, 311 yards through the air, and 0 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Tony Pollard?
I don't mind Tony Pollard with what Tennessee's trying to redo with their offense, but what I'm concerned with about Tony Pollard is I really think that him and Tajay Spears are basically going to 50-50 split this backfield. And so with that being the case, I think there's going to be some consistency that's lacking from Tony Pollard. Now, again, as a depth piece, I don't mind it, coming off the board, RB 29. I don't necessarily hate that. I think there might be, a little bit of room for improvement off of there, but really holistically, I think it's kind of going about where he's going to end up, right? You're in a 50-50 split with an offense that's completely getting overhauled. No more Derrick Henry. They brought in all these pass catchers to go to be there, with Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins and Tyler Boyd, right? Like they clearly want to throw the ball a bit more and put weapons around Will Levis. On top of the fact that Will Levis does scramble a little bit, right? Like he's not necessarily the fastest quarterback. He's not Lamar Jackson, but he is shifty back there, and he's not afraid to break one off if that's what he needs to do. Kind of more in that Daniel Jones-esque guys. So I'm really if I'm going like 0 RB, yeah, I'm looking at a Tony Pollard or Javonte and something like that, but I don't know that he is going to be my first option. And if I already have 1 or 2 running backs and I'm just looking for depth, I'm probably looking for a little bit more upside than what I feel like Tony Pollard's going to give me coming off the bench.
Feels like a great best ball play with Tony Pollard, right? Because if it is a true 50-50 split, maybe there's a week where, they ride the hot hand. Again, we're still kind of waiting to see what this Tennessee offense is going to look like, how he's going to slot in with this Tennessee offense. I think a lot of people myself included, were kind of down on Tony Pollard last year, right? Because he was on such a high-powered offense, and he didn't live up to the expectations of what I think a lot of people drafted him. But you look back at it, and he had a pretty decent year, 1,000-yard rusher. Found the end zone, just wasn't nearly as efficient as he was the 2 previous seasons with his opportunities. So I think there's a little bit of recency bias that might spurn some people off of him. I think it is a risk, new situation, but I will echo what Kevin said in that it is a great depth piece. I think he's a perfect best ball candidate. And certainly somebody that is intriguing. One I would keep my eye on, and one that I think I'm going to have to pay a little bit more attention to what the reports are coming out of Nashville.
Fair enough. Yeah, Tony Pollard was a for really no other way to describe it, just kind of a disappointing season last year, right? Like this was a guy that, coming into it, there was a lot of chatter, a lot of talk, a lot of viewpoints in the fantasy community coming into last season that this would be a massive breakout year, massive, upside type of deal, because the seasons previous, it was Zeke that had eaten into that work and had cannibalized, goal line type of work, red zone type of work. They were splitting so many carries that it just didn't showcase what he could really do as far as fantasy goes. And he comes in last year, certainly gets the bell cow type of role in Dallas, and it just wasn't there, right? Like the fantasy production was not there. And so this is one of those that Tony Pollard very well may be the guy that operates better when not having the full workload and being able to split some of that workload and split some of that timeshare with that as well, right? And we've seen that with other backs in the past that are good at good receiving the ball out of the backfield and have a lot of burst and a lot of pop to them. And so this may be beneficial here for him this season with kind of that split share in there. And I do think that Tony Pollard is going to still return some value, right, from where he's coming off the board currently. Like, I think when the season's all said and done, we'll see him get inside of RB2 territory. So a little bit of value here, but again, this is not one of those that if I'm putting him on my roster as my third back, there's other directions that I'd rather work, rather look and take some running back work a little bit different route there. So, any other thoughts on Tony Pollard? Alrighty, let's go ahead and head on over to Jonathan Brooks. And Jonathan Brooks coming into Carolina as a rookie out of Texas. Thoughts on Jonathan Brooks?
A rookie out of Texas coming off a torn ACL and seemingly being slotting in behind Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders. I'm not 100% here. I think for dynasty plays, sure. I will be shocked if he even gets to a third of the carries in the backfield this year. So at where he's going in a redraft, I am out.
For a redraft, I think I agree with this, right? Like we saw what we got out of Javonte, a guy that we were just talking about, right? The year after coming out, and that's with NFL success, right? And not that Jonathan Brooks isn't a capable back on skill set, but coming back from the ACL, getting adjusted to NFL life, making sure the playbook's there, the rhythm and timing, the offensive line, the nuances of knowing how to read your blocks and kind of what the expectation is. And the Carolina Panthers are still not going to be great, guys. Like, it's not like they're going to be in a position to just pound the rock. And so, yes, he's going to get some exposure, but I don't know that he's ever going to be anchored this season, right? So I'm with you, Alex. I don't see the point in taking him there. I would rather have a Tony Pollard. I would rather have a Javonte Williams. I mean, he's instantly slotted to the bottom of the list that we're talking about tonight, and realistically, probably a touch lower when it's all said and done with, when we get into our kind of personal rankings. But he's just a guy that I'm not super high on this year. Next year, I think I will have a different tune on him. I do like him for dynasty purposes. So yes, I'm willing to spend the first round draft capital to pick him up in a dynasty league. But in a redraft league, there's no point. Like, there's no point. There's no timetable for his return. There's no guarantee that once he does return and finally gets up to speed and everything else, that the Panthers aren't just going to kind of hold him back and go, you know what? Like, why don't we make this more of a red shirt year? Like, okay, you can go, run around. You can be on the field for 15 plays. You can have 7 carries, something like that. And then we're just going to pull you out and, let you continue to learn and truly get NFL ready instead of rushing him in. Like, if you're going to spend the top end of the second round pick on a guy like this, yes, you want him to play, but you don't want to rush him back and then basically blow your draft pick. So I'm not buying into this one this year. I'm out.
Yeah, I think I'm right there as well, right? Like this is one of those that you don't necessarily take a guy in the second round to have it be a short-term type of deal. So I do think that you're going to see them looking at a longer term type of deal here. Yeah, and this is one of those that, Jonathan Brooks certainly very, very talented back there. But at the same time too, right? Like this is one of those that coming off of a massive injury, and this is that same kind of injury that not that long ago. I was just saying that with Javonte, this is a guy that typically you want to wait the season after the return from injury season type of thing. So sophomore season for Jonathan Brooks, I do think that I'm going to be all in on that one. But where you're having to take him right now, I don't want that as my third running back on my roster there. Yeah, even as my fourth running back, I'm going to have a harder time doing that one. This is one that I will wait and see because most likely you're going to see somebody draft him way too early with draft capital there, and he's going to be hanging out on the waiver wire come probably about weeks 5 or 6, somewhere in there, and you have a chance to potentially even pick him up for a backstretch run there. But yeah, this is one of those that I'm willing to be wrong that if he's that down the stretch type of hero running back this year. I'm not going to be spending draft capital there. Any other thoughts on Jonathan Brooks? All righty, let's go ahead and head on over to Raheem Mostert. And Raheem Mostert last year, 209 attempts, 1,012 yards, 18 touchdowns. Had an additional 25 receptions on 32 targets for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Raheem Mostert?
This guy is criminally undervalued. Like I am buying Raheem Mostert everywhere I can get him at this level. Like it just makes no sense. RB2 last year. I don't expect him to finish in the top 5 again. I don't expect him to have 21 total touchdowns like he had last year. But I do expect explosion and production. Even with Achane, even with Wright in the backfield, Miami wants to run the ball. They want to establish the run so that way they can set up the deep plays to Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. And there's nothing saying that Mostert isn't going to lead this backfield. Like we are so high and mighty off of 3 great games from Devon Achane. 3 great games, and no one can take that away from him and what he did in a career game against the Denver Broncos. But it was Raheem Mostert who played 15 games last year, not Devon Achane. It was Raheem Mostert that led the backfield in touches every single game he played, not Devon Achane. And nothing has changed in that offense. Mostert's a year older. Yeah, 32 doesn't look great, but I don't know that you're going to find another 32-year-old in the NFL who's as fast as Raheem Mostert is. He still has speed. And because of his limited use and injury history early on in his career, he's not beat up. Like he's not a guy who has, very minimal tread left on the tire. So I like Raheem. I absolutely like him. And if you want a piece of this Miami offense, this is the cheapest piece you're going to get. So I'm all about it because high octane, they're going to put points up on the board. Here's the kicker with Raheem, and everybody pay attention to me. You draft Raheem Mostert, you run him through week 10, maybe 11, whenever your bye week is, and you flip him at your trade deadline. And you flip him at your trade deadline because look at his playoff schedule. In week 14, last week of the regular season, he has the New York Jets. And then week 15, Houston Texans. Okay, that's maybe a bit more favorable. But week 16, San Francisco 49ers. Week 17, Cleveland Browns. And if you play a dual week championship, week 18 against the Jets again. The last quarter of the regular season for the Dolphins is brutal against the run. So flip him at your trade deadline. but soak everything up you can before then and let those offers come in and trade them off to someone who's trying to make a playoff push and sabotage them while you can elevate yourself. Like that is going to be the key with Raheem for this season.
I like that you use the tread on the tires because that's all I can think of with him. He's going into year 10, so 9 NFL seasons. He has played 80 NFL games. The crazy part about that is 31 of those 80 have come the last 2 years, right? He has been a completely different player since he's moved from San Francisco to Miami, with the exception of the, what was it, the 2019 year? Yeah, kind of his breakout year there in San Francisco. But yeah, he's been pretty stellar for him to be going at this low at 27. We're about to talk about in the next 5 guys. I think I would take Raheem Mostert in front of perhaps the next 5. It might be even more if that just a quick look there. But I agree with Kevin. He is very undervalued. This is the cheapest piece of the Miami offense you're going to get because Tyreek's going way too soon. Achan, everybody seems to have a love affair with, and rightfully so, right? The boom potential is very intriguing. Mostert has been reliable. Now there will be regression, as Kevin said. 18 touchdowns is not sustainable. 18 rushing touchdowns is not sustainable. But 209 carries, 1,000 yards, that is sustainable and copyable. And those are things that even if he scores half of the touchdowns that he scored last year, that's still a great season right there.
Right. No, that's a very good point. And so, this is one of those that if you think that Raheem Mostert is going to play more than 12 games or more, and we'll see 135 rush attempts or more, then this is a guy that you need to be drafting. Like it's kind of crazy when you look at some of the correlations and some of his career long statistics, right? Anytime that Raheem Mostert has gone 137 or more rushing attempts in a season, his worst finish is running back 26. So at worst case, if you think that he's going to get that kind of deal, you're drafting him at his floor here. And we've seen what the ceiling can be, right? As a running back 2 overall, right? And so this is one that at this value, I think that there's a ton, or at this ADP, there's a ton of value here, and a guy that is that you should be drafting. If he's on the board, getting down in there, hit draft, move on. It's about as easy as that. Any other thoughts on Raheem Mostert? All right, let's go ahead and hit up Jaylen Warren. And Jaylen Warren last season, 149 rush attempts, 785 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns, had an additional 61 receptions on 74 targets for 370 through the air and 0 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Jaylen Warren?
Split backfield, right? This is Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears all over again.
2.0.
So
yeah.
The thing that scares me about Jaylen Warren in particular is with how the Steelers offense, right? Their new offensive coordinator is
Arthur Smith.
Okay. Arthur Smith doesn't really throw the ball to the running back all too often. Now, Jaylen can run the ball for sure, but he is not necessarily going to catch the ball like he did last year. So those 61 receptions, I don't think you're going to see that again. I think you're going to see something closer to 48 to 52. So some of this production, I think, is automatically going to drop. Now, I do believe that the Steelers are going to run the crap out of the football, regardless of who's under center for them. So I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity there. It's just a matter of, Do you have a 5'8"? I mean, he's 215. He's not that slight of frame, but Najee's in a contract year. We'll get to him in a little bit. We're going to focus on Jaylen Warren. Sorry. I don't see it as much. Like, I'm passing on Warren. Like, I don't really want a piece of this Steelers offense this year. Maybe George Pickens, maybe. But nothing about the Steelers offense excites me. I don't find them to be a high octane offense. I don't believe they're going to be putting lots of points up on the board. And so it's not necessarily going to lead into most league's fantasy success. I think he plays well in our home league, guys, like, quite honestly, because it's a volume league. Like, we get points for touchdowns, but you accumulate points for every time they get the ball in their hands, right? Carry, reception, everything like that. I think it'll play well in our home league to an extent, and so maybe this is accurate for the home league. But when you're going in a standard half point or full point PPR, I would tell you this is a overreach right here, and I am going to pass. I don't want any part of it.
I will just add that the Pittsburgh schedule is brutal. He would be great the first half of the season. Their bye week is week 9, and then I would be shipping him off for whatever I could get out of him, because that back half is terrible. It is every single division game, with the exception of it is every single division game. So you know what the AFC, what's that? AFC North? Yeah, AFC North, excuse me. Brain fart moment there. You know what the AFC North is when it comes to defenses and how staunch they are against the run. So you get 2 games against Baltimore, 2 games against Cleveland, 2 games against Cincinnati. Your non-division games are at Washington, at Philadelphia, and against Kansas City. And we know that Kansas City, somehow, some way, while their defense is a sieve the first 6 weeks of the season, they figure it out in the back half of the season, and that defense is locked down and just lights out. So that's a really, really tough schedule, especially the back half of the season for him. So not only is he probably playing a second fiddle, if not, he's not playing first fiddle, right? Like, we can all agree to that. If he's not playing second fiddle, he's certainly not playing first fiddle behind Najee. And then couple that with the schedule that Pittsburgh has. No, thank you.
Right. And so kind of Kevin brought up a really good point on who the offensive coordinator is here, right? With Arthur Smith. I think we can all agree that Bijan Robinson, better running back, better catcher of the football than Jaylen Warren as far as a receiving back goes, right? Like, very few running backs have that same kind of skill set as Bijan Robinson, right? Christian McCaffrey might be the only one that can outdo that, right? Like, as far as what we see out there. So Bijan was very frustrating for fantasy last season, right? And that was because you had so much of this split type of work between Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson. I think we see very similar to that this season, where if you go Najee, you go Jaylen Warren, you're just going to be frustrated as to which one to try and put into your lineup, and ultimately you'll probably end up picking wrong in a lot of those situations. I know that Jaylen Warren is certainly a fantasy darling out there this season, and a lot of folks have him as a sleeper type of deal and being the guy to target, and a lot of upside there. I'm just not necessarily seeing this, right? As far as the opportunities go, this is going to be at best a 50-50 split to it. And I don't know that we necessarily see that. I think this is probably more of a 60-40 split with Najee getting the bulk there. I think that we're going to see this one here. And not only on the offensive coordinator side of things, the quarterback situation is Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. Neither one of those guys have a history of checking the ball down to their running backs and bringing that thing home that way. So if you're drafting him for that receiving type of upside, you're drafting him for that type of thing, I think you're just going to be very frustrated with this draft pick at the end of the season. And this is a guy that I'm not going to be targeting in any of my drafts. Any other thoughts on Jaylen Warren? All righty. Let's go ahead and head on over to Zach Moss. And Zach Moss last year in Indianapolis, 183 rush attempts, 794 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, had an additional 27 receptions on 37 targets for 192 through the air and 2 touchdowns. Thoughts on Zach Moss?
So I think this is about where Zach Moss ends up, right? We're talking RB25, so fringe RB2 territory. I think this is fair value for Zach Moss. Like, I don't think he's going to be as productive as what Joe Mixon was. I know that Chase Brown is a fantasy darling here this year. He was getting some reps with the first team, and so everyone was going out of their mind, right? Like, it reminded me of The Dark Knight, right, with Heath Ledger, and when he's in the room with Batman, and he's talking about, you know, they're going back and forth, and Heath Ledger, they're losing their minds. Like, that's what I think of when stupid things pop up like this from training camp, which is why I roll my eyes. Like, it very well may be Chase Brown to some extent, but Chase Brown is not going to be able to carry an entire load for a team. And typically the Bengals kind of latch on to one running back. That's what we've seen out of them, even with drafting Chase Brown. And you had Samaje behind Joe Mixon there for a couple years and everything. And they really stuck with Joe. I think it's going to be Zach. I don't think he's going to see a whole lot of passing work, though, with what they're doing in Cincinnati. Joe's kind of on a mission. They're going to get Jamar Chase signed and bring him in. Like, yes, he's going to get some work because it's a good offense and an offensive line that should be healthy and improved upon from last year and 2 years ago. So, yes, there's fantasy value in there, but I think with where you're getting him, it's fair value. It is equal opportunity, risk, and reward with Zach Moss here at this level. And again, overall 74 RB25, like, there's a lot of cases if you're drafting running back a certain way, like, he could be your third back on your team. Like, and it's not a bad play. I would rather have Mostert, like, to what Alex was talking about. Like, this is one of those things that's kind of disparaging. Like, I would much rather have Raheem Mostert and reach for him if I think he's not going to get back around to me, right? Zach Moss is at 84, Mostert's at 86. So it's not even a reach. You're just trading down slightly. And I'd much rather have that piece of Miami than this piece of Cincinnati.
Yeah, that's actually the framing of the argument, right? Is it that piece of Miami or this piece of Cincinnati? And I think that piece of Miami is a lot more intriguing. I think that speaks more about, maybe not so much about Miami, but more about this piece of Cincinnati with Zach Moss. You're also only going to get, if history is any indicator, 12 to 14 games of Zach Moss, right? He hasn't played more than 14 games in any single game or any single season. So that's concerning. You need to make sure that this isn't a guy that you're hitching your wagon on. And I think, to Kevin's point, because his availability is not always there, right? You're going to miss 3-4 games of a season. That hurts where he finishes ultimately, because you're missing those opportunities to score points. So running back 25 feels like Kevin said, right about where Zach Moss is going to finish this year, right about running back 25. I think he's fringe RB2. If he squeaks into RB2, I'm not surprised, right? Because I think there's a few people that are ahead here that may not finish up this way. I think there's a few names that we'll get to that I don't know have the season that everybody might expect. So if he sneaks into the bottom half of RB2, not a surprise, but that's where you're drafting him.
Yeah, fair enough. And this is again one of those that I think with Zach Moss, it's kind of, you're just kind of getting what you get when you draft him here, right? Like, he's an RB2, RB3 when the season's all said and done. While he certainly had a little bit of a resurgence for himself last season in Indianapolis, versus what we had seen in Buffalo, this is not going to be I don't think that when we see this thing all the way kind of through when this thing's all said and done, right? Like Joe Mixon was last few seasons RB1 at a worst case scenario, and several seasons with a top 5 type of finish. Like that's not where we're going to see Zach Moss get into. And even if they do latch on to one of these running backs here, and that's kind of the primary guy, and the other guy comes in to do some relief work and pass catching work. Like this is one of those that I think at best we can see Zach Moss's ceiling be somewhere around running back 20. But I think that's a bit of a stretch even at that point. So fringe RB2, and that's kind of where I see him. Any other thoughts on Zach Moss? All righty. Let's go ahead and hit up DeAndre Swift. And DeAndre Swift last season in Philadelphia, 229 rush attempts, 1,049 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, 39 receptions on 49 targets for 214 yards and one pass catching touchdown. Thoughts on DeAndre Swift?
I think Swift showed us some things last year in Philadelphia, right? Because for a long time in Detroit, we just kind of, okay, Swift is the pass catching back, right? Like that was his role. He was the pass catching back, and it didn't matter whether he was behind Williams or I guess he was behind Williams the last 2 years.
Miles Sanders, right? Yeah.
So and then in Philly, and then Philly, you kind of had the cast of characters. You had him and Gainwell and everybody else. But 229 carries in 16 games, like that's not bad, right? Like again, Philly's offensive line's bit better than what Chicago's is, though, right? So I think what we're really going to put into play is he able to stay above 4 yards per carry? He has done it every single year of his career. And if he's able to do it here in Philadelphia, I would tell you that this is a really good play right here. What I don't know is how much Caleb Williams is going to be willing to check the ball down to his running back. He has a lot of weapons to throw to, 2 capable tight ends, 3 very good wide receivers, and and then DeAndre Swift thrown into the mix there. So it'll be interesting to see how much they get him involved in the passing game. And that's really going to kind of tell you whether this is kind of where he's at and where his natural setting is, or whether there's some upside to this pick. So I don't hate this pick right here at 24. I think that's right. I think that's about correct. He's a fringe wider or running back too. Like, he has upside of being able to put together some RB, some top 10 running back type weeks. And then you're going to have some that fall outside and you're looking at more RB3 type numbers. A lot of it's going to be up to the offensive line. And again, how much Caleb Williams is going to use him in the passing game. 39 reception is not going to get it done in Chicago. He needs to be much closer to the 62 receptions he had his sophomore year in Detroit to counteract the fact that I think he's going to struggle with his yards per carry. I think it's going to drop from 4.5, 4.6. I think you're going to be seeing him at like 3.8, 3.9, something like that, which doesn't seem like a huge difference when we're just talking about that. But over the course of 180 to 220 touches, depending on health, that adds up pretty quickly. So it's fair value. Much like what we were talking about with Zach Moss. It is fair value right here. This is yet another guy. I think I still want Raheem over DeAndre Swift. Like, I like the excitement of the running game of Miami more so than the uncertainty of the entire offense and what that's going to look like under a rookie quarterback in Chicago.
I'm going to make a case against DeAndre Swift, and I'm going to make a case for DeAndre Swift. The case against DeAndre Swift has nothing to do with him as the player, but him as the contract he just signed, right? He was earning that contract last year in Philadelphia, right? Like that, and rightfully so. He gets paid because of what he has done. And he had a great season last year in Philadelphia. He gets rewarded with 3 years and 20 some odd $1 million from Chicago because of that. I like a hungry back, right? I like a guy who's on a contract here, especially for fantasy purposes, because that's what you're getting, right? You get that production. You'll see it more often than not that a guy looking for the next contract balls out, right? And then he gets that contract, and maybe we're not balling out so hard, right? I'm not saying that that's going to be the case with DeAndre Swift, but it's happened once. It'll happen again. It could happen in this case. Now, the case that I'm going to make for DeAndre Swift isn't actually about him either. It is that Shane Waldron is the new OC in Chicago, and he came from Seattle. And what did he do in Seattle, where he had talented running backs on the roster and could have divvied up or spread out the wealth a little bit? But what did he do? He primarily had Kenneth Walker getting a lion's share of the carries there in Seattle last year. So that could bode well. If DeAndre Swift is the bell cow and they utilize him as such, because that's what Shane Waldron likes to do, then that's a case for him. And I think that both of those things are in play for DeAndre Swift. Again, neither of those things have anything to do with him, really, right? So I'll say all that to say that I agree with Kevin that this is fair value, and I'd rather have Raheem Mostert.
Fair enough. This is one of those that the Bears certainly felt there was some opportunity at the running back position with how they pursued DeAndre Swift and brought him in and signed him to the contract, all of those things. All of that to say though that DeAndre Swift is this is one of those that I think we're again getting fair value on this, right? Not really echoing anything different there. And I think at best we may see him sneak up to RB 17 or 18 on the season. But I think more realistically, when it's all said and done, we're going to see him at the back half of RB2, closer to RB 22, 23, 24, kind of in that range there. So this is a guy that I certainly don't have a problem with where he's going and the draft capital being spent. But I may be looking a little different directions depending upon who's still on the board at that point. Any other thoughts on DeAndre Swift? All righty. Let's go ahead and take a look at James Conner. And James Conner last season, 208 rush attempts, 1,040 yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, had an additional 27 receptions on 33 targets, 165 yards, and 2 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on James Conner?
This is my I don't think I would rather have Raheem Mostert point of the last people that we've talked about. I think you've got 1, maybe 2 years left of James Conner being the James Conner that we know, which is where you're going to get him for about 13 games. You can get him for about 700. Last year he had over 1,000 yards, but I think that was because there was no Kyler last year, right? So he became the featured piece of the Arizona offense. Kyler's back, so some of that rushing work goes away because Kyler will inevitably scramble for more plays instead of turning around and handing the ball off. So I think that here's a probable season for James Conner. Call it 190 carries, call it 800 yards, 7 touchdowns, and maybe 2 more touchdowns through the air. I don't know where that puts him as a finish, but that feels about right. Like that just feels about where he would be. Where would that have him finished last year? 700 yards, a couple touchdowns, or about 7 touchdowns.
2021.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where he's going, right? That's where he's going. And that feels about where he is. But I like his ability with Kyler back in that offense. It feels a little bit more attractive.
So I like James Conner. I like the story of James Conner. He's a guy that's really easy to root for. He's a guy that is a good piece, whether he's a flex piece, whether he's your RB2, depending on, if you're going zero or hero RB, right? If that's kind of your strategy and you're just stacking up on wide receiver in between. I don't mind Connor. I still think I'd rather have Raheem Mostert. Like, it just personal preference. Now, I think it might get a little bit closer with James Conner, but if I'm getting James Conner, that means I have to draft Trey Benson. Like, I just have to draft Trey Benson. So that means I'm spending another pick on a backup running back for the 4 or 5 games that I'm going to absolutely need him, because Connor's not going to be able to go. Like, he just is not, for whatever reason, he just gets dinged up a little bit. That being said, if you're comfortable with that, I have no qualms with James Conner. Like, I think this is pretty good value here at 23. Honestly, I think this is pretty much his floor with what you're getting at James Conner. So the sky is the limit, right? We've seen him finish as high as RB5 in his career. I think realistically, you could see him get up, from where he's drafted here, RB23. I think you could see him sneak, maybe RB13, 14, in a really good season, if he's able to crack 1,000 yards again, if he gets a couple more receptions. Last year at 27 was down. Again, Kyler not being there did not help that. So you tack another, 10-ish receptions onto that. And it kind of adds in there, maybe he falls into the end zone, like you said, 8 rushing touchdowns, but maybe he's able to, grab another receiving touchdown in that. So there's a path to fringe RB1, right? And you're drafting him at the back end of RB2. So there's plenty of upside to be had with James Conner, but he's not electric enough, right? If I'm getting a running back in this area, I want someone who can be electric. James Conner is steady. He is a steadfast running back. You kind of, what you're going to get. It's a churning production where he's able to just kind of grind it out. They'll feed him in the red zone, but he's not going to break away. He's not going to have a 50-yard run and put up a massive week and that type of thing. And I still feel like if I'm waiting and that's my strategy at running back, that's why I'd rather have Mostert over Conner. So again, depending on how you're drafting, what you feel comfortable with, but this is his floor, in my opinion. So I do feel like there's good value built in for James Conner.
Right. I do agree with that. I do think that there's a lot of, floor type of feel here for James Conner, where he's coming off the board. And a guy that I certainly don't have a problem with, if I'm going zero RB type of strategy, putting him on as my third type of running back. Because I do think that we will see him ultimately perform up there in the 800 to 900 yards rushing. We'll probably see him get right around 10 total touchdowns when the season's all done. So I think there's a lot of really good value in there, and we'll see a guy that can get right around that, get kind of right around that RB20 type of finish to it. But that Kevin made some good points about the fact that you'll want to get get the backup here, because James Conner typically only goes about 13 to 14 games a season, and you'd better have some options if you're needing to pivot off of that, especially from a standpoint that if you're taking him as an RB, your second RB on the roster, that's going to eat into some things down the stretch there. So I do like James Conner, do like what he provides for your fantasy roster, but there is just a little bit of hesitation there. Any other thoughts on James Conner? Alrighty, let's go ahead and hit up Zamir White. And Zamir White last year, 104 rush attempts, 451 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 15 receptions on 19 targets, 98 yards, no touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Zamir White?
Am I missing something?
What's that?
Like, I get that he's gonna be, the number one back here in Las Vegas, but like, I how is he going this high? It is. Is it just because he's going to be the number one back and there's a bunch of Jags behind him? Guys that have tried to be in this league that haven't really panned out as well. Alexander Madison, Amir Abdullah is still a thing. Like, I don't. Maybe I'm just completely off the mark here, Kevin. But and Derek, but I don't see it. Like, I don't see how he finishes higher than where he is being drafted.
Okay. He, in 4 games that he started last year, okay, he averaged 99 yards on the ground and 4.17 yards per carry. So you start there. The Raiders drafted probably the best run blocking offensive lineman in the draft this year in the first round. So they're building that up. And if you're Las Vegas, do you really want to entrust your season to Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell? So he's not going to get a lot of passing work. This is like old school Frank Gore status is what this is going to be. Like, he is just going to get fed the ball 20 times a game on the ground. Like, he might have 25 to 30 receptions by the time the season's done with. And I think that might be stretching it a little bit, honestly. That might be a little bit of Georgia homerism, if you will. But Zeus White can run the ball. Like, there's no doubt about it. He is a physical runner. He can run the ball. And this is what Vegas is going to have to do. Like, they're not going to outshoot Kansas City, right? Those games lately have been grimy when they're playing each other. They're not necessarily shootouts. And that's the way that Vegas needs them to be. You know, Denver needs to show us that they're running, you know, that they can stop the run. Otherwise, you got 2 games against Denver where he's, you know, set to go off. You know, he put up 112 against Denver in week 18 last year. He put up 145 against Kansas City in week 16. Right? Kansas City's trying to make a playoff push, right? Week 16, they start to click. Like, they're ready for the playoffs. He put up 145 on them. So the guy can run the ball. He's just not going to catch it a whole lot. So my argument to that is, if he finds a pair of hands and they get him involved in the passing game, and we go from, you know, 220 touches to 260 touches, he's going too low. Again, I think the value's there. I think it's right there. It's risk. There's some risk because he's only started 4 games in his NFL career. There's reward because with Josh Jacobs gone, all those touches need to go somewhere. And Josh Jacobs was we all had him in the top 12. Every year he was in Las Vegas, we had him inside the top 12. Is Jacobs a better overall running back than White? Maybe. I think there's a very good argument that says yes, he is, right? He's probably a little bit quicker. His hands are a little bit better out of the backfield. But I don't think the drop-off is from RB8 to RB 20. What is it, 22? I don't think it's that big of a drop-off between the two. And this is how Oakland, I keep wanting to say Oakland, this is how Las Vegas stays in football games. Yes, you have Brock Bowers. Yes, you have Jacoby Myers. And yes, you have Devontae Adams. You have Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew throwing the ball. And so, yes, assuming Minshew's the quarterback, he can keep a team afloat, but he needs a running game. Gardner Minshew is not, Matt Stafford, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, where he can just set back and rocket on his right arm and win a team of football game. They have to stay balanced. And I don't see their offense being anything but balanced or the attempt of all season long in Las Vegas. So I think he's adequate value here. You just have to be prepared that it's going to be old school points here. You're not going to get a lot out of PPR leagues. So half point and standard leagues, I'm all over Zeus. Full point, I probably am leaning towards James Conner, that type of thing. And again, full point, I'm still drafting Raheem Mostert over this guy. Like, we're going back to that well to show you the value on Raheem Mostert. I'm still not drafting Mostert over Zeus. Like, it just, the big play upside is there. And I got to see Zeus actually fall into the end zone a couple times to show that Vegas is going to get him there.
Well said.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly understand that, and this is Kevin made the point very well that this is a volume based type of play. So when you're going with Raheem Mostert and you're drafting him, you're drafting a guy that is all the reports are that Zamir White will be the running back one for the Raiders this season, and that has very typically led to 250 plus opportunities on the ground. And at that point, right, like if he can get around 4 yards a carry or more, which last season he averaged 4.3, that'll put over 1,000 yards on the ground. You'd like to think with that kind of volume that we'll see 6, 7, 8 touchdowns type of thing there on the ground as well. But I think Kevin hit the point very well that you're not going to see a ton of receiving work out of Zamir White here. So this is one of those that you're going to be hopeful for all those points coming on the ground. And this is one of those that where I think that he kind of projects out for. You're going to see him probably finish somewhere around. He may be able to make it all the way up into RB 15 type of territory, but I don't think we're going to necessarily see him go beyond that. But at the worst case scenario, you're drafting him at the floor with the volume based type of production that we could see put up here. Any other thoughts on Zamir White? Alrighty, let's go ahead and head on over to David Montgomery. And David Montgomery last year in Detroit, 219 rush attempts, 1,015 yards, 13 touchdowns on the ground, 16 receptions on 24 targets with 117 yards through the air, no touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on David Montgomery?
I think his overall stat line is identical or damn near this season. Even if he plays all season, right? So even if he plays 17 games, assuming that they're going to find ways to get Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit more involved, everything else, Montgomery's still going to see the vast majority of the goal line work. He's going to be their short yardage back, and he's going to be their thumper on first and second down. Yes, they're going to put Gibbs in there. Yes, he's going to be able to run the ball because he showed that he can do that. But you are going to utilize both of these backs. So even with Gibbs getting more involved on a week in, week out basis, if that limits Montgomery to still have 220 rushing attempts, 230 rush attempts over 17 games or even 16 games as opposed to 14, I still think he's over 1,000 yards because that Lions offense is top probably 2, maybe 3 in the NFL between the Lions, the Colts, and Philadelphia. I think are probably the 3 best offensive lines from top to bottom. And so if that's the case, and I believe it is, this is another guy grossly undervalued. So David Montgomery is where I draw the line. I would take Montgomery over Raheem Mostert, but I tell you what, there's a big enough gap in between David Montgomery and Raheem Mostert that you could end up with both. And that's not a bad 1-2 punch if you're going 0 RB. You load up on wide receiver and then boom, you double tap Montgomery and Mostert back to back, especially if you have that kind of quick turn and you're able to grab both at like the 9 hole or something like that, and you can get both in that quick turnaround. You're feeling really good about running back, and you waited forever for it. So that's where the strategy really applies, right? We keep talking about this. We'll get into draft strategies here very shortly, here in a couple of weeks after we finish the last bit of player breakdowns. But that's ideal, right? That you can't draw it up better than that. I'm going to get a running back who, yes, split carries, but they're in high scoring, high efficient offenses who, one is a big play guy who was able to score a crap ton of touchdowns last year. Yes, I think there's regression, but still going to be there. But Montgomery, I'll take 13 touchdowns over a running back that I'm getting in 76 overall. Like, I have no problem with that. So I like David Montgomery. I tell you, he's absolutely being drafted at whatever perceived floor that there is, and I am absolutely grabbing him up willingly every chance I get.
I would agree. David Montgomery has always been one of those guys. He's just been so dang reliable, and I've had him on my roster in various leagues over the last 4 years. And he's just been so reliable, even from his first year in 2019. Like he's been right at his worst year. He's had 801 yards and 5 touchdowns, and that was his last year in Chicago. And we know that Chicago offense was terrible, and he was like the lone bright spot on it in 2022. So he has just always been a reliable piece. I have no reason to believe that he would be anything but, even with Jahmyr Gibbs on the roster. And we saw what that looked like last year. And yes, Jahmyr Gibbs was a rookie. And yes, Gibbs did get used a little bit more towards the end, but they figured it out how they could get Montgomery still engaged and involved. And that ended up being the goal line work. And it ended up, he had the lion's share of the carries. So I like David Montgomery. I like him, especially at running back 21, 76 overall. Like, sign me up. If he's the first running back that I take at 76 overall, like that's awesome.
Yeah, Monty has got some upside here for sure, right? I do think that there's some good things to be said about that one. And if you were listening to this show last year, you knew to draft David Montgomery and even go a little bit early on that one there. And it went very similar to how we predicted that one. Right? Like, this is going to be another, I think, very much a similar rinse and repeat type of season for him, where we're going to see somewhere around the 200 to 220 carries, him average somewhere between 4 and 4.5 yards per carry. So call it somewhere, 900 yards type of thing. And I think we're going to see more than double-digit touchdowns on the ground here again. And so this is a guy that I think can certainly outperform his current ADP, and as a guy that you will have been happy to have on your fantasy roster. Any other thoughts on David Montgomery? All righty, let's go ahead and hit up Najee Harris. And Najee Harris last year, 255 rush attempts, 1,035 yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, 29 receptions on 38 targets for 170 yards to the air. Thoughts on Najee?
I think this is fair value. Like, I don't see where these numbers change a whole lot. Like, I don't necessarily, maybe he gets a few more rushing attempts because of, this Arthur Smith style offense and how I think they're going to run it. 4 yards a clip isn't bad, right? Like, it was not the high end output that we expected from Najee, but 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. If you told someone that at the beginning of the season last year, like, you're going to get 1,000 yards and 8 rushing touchdowns out of Najee Harris, you're like, yeah, okay, he can be my RB2. And then he was your RB2, and everyone pissed and moaned about it all season long, right? It just wasn't necessarily pretty how it got there, but it broke down. Sorry, I'm looking at the rushing breakdown. His touchdowns came in the back half of the season where you needed them to. Now, his snap percentage, it was 56% he was on the field for. So he was on the field slightly more than what Jaylen Warren was. Passing work wasn't nearly as much. But again, I think this is what you expect out of Najee. Like 1,000 yards, 7-8 touchdowns, and you call it good. So I would tell you where he's going RB20 is fair value. I would rather have David Montgomery, right? The guy we just talked about. So I think that's there. I think I would slide Najee down in my personal rankings because I would rather have Mostert than Najee, right? So again, going through some of that, but I don't have a problem with Najee, but nothing about Pittsburgh excites me. It's the same thing I said about Jaylen Warren. Nothing about this offense excites me with Arthur Smith. So I'm going to stay away from it.
Do you think that Najee finishes ahead of Jaylen Warren when it's all said and done? Yeah.
Yes.
By how many spots do you think? More than 10?
No.
Yeah, right. It just doesn't excite me. Like,
No.
I
If
think
it
you're going to be
gets to more
so
than 10,
frustrated
it's
with
because the
Najee.
passing work was so low for Warren.
Yeah.
That's how you get to more than 10, was the lack of passing work, because that's what kept it close.
Right.
Was Jaylen Warren's passing work. You know, if
I-
Najee's putting up 8 touchdowns, Warren might have 4. So
Yeah.
there's 24 points in between the two of them just to start with.
I think it's
see
going to be
Jaylen Warren
frustrating
with 30 more receptions than Najee to close that gap.
Yeah. It's just going to be frustrating for Najee owners. I think realistically now we kind of know what we're getting, right? With Najee Harris. So you're drafting him in a probably where he probably should have been being drafted all along, right? In this RB2 territory. And that nothing against him. He didn't have any say on where he was going, and we all thought that he was going to be this great fantasy running back, and it just hasn't been that way.
Well,
I don't know that the change in OC has a huge impact. Go ahead.
no, I was just saying part of that was his reception totals, right? 1,200 yards his rookie campaign. What was it, 1,038 and 1,035 in years 2 and 3, right? So the rushing production is roughly the same. The rushing touchdowns, 778, roughly the same, right? So, but his rookie campaign, he had 74 receptions. 74 receptions. We thought we were looking at a new and improved version of Austin Eckler,
Right.
and then it dropped 41, and then insert Jaylen Warren, it dropped again. 29. Like, Pittsburgh has failed Najee just as much as Najee has stumbled, because his yards per carry has been consistent between his low year was in 22 at a 382. His high year was last year, his terrible year, at 406. So his yards per carry is good or adequate, right? It is above average, if you will. It's the passing work. And I think that's where we need to realize that we're not going to see 74 receptions out of a game, much to your point, Alex. But that's why he shined so brightly his rookie year.
Yeah.
It's because the dude had 74 grabs on top of 300 carries. Like, he touched the ball 400 times his rookie year.
Yeah. I think if I draft Najee Harris this year, it will be done reluctantly. That's the last I'll say on it.
Fair enough. I don't know that you need to be reluctant in drafting Najee, right? Like, this is, again, one of those that we're going to probably see the volume out of this one. And out of between the two backs, I think I would rather have Najee over Jaylen Warren, simply from the standpoint that the touchdowns are the touchdowns, the touches, the opportunities are probably going to be far more predictable to this one than what we see off of a Jaylen Warren type of mix in there, right? Like, again, Arthur Smith, you know, we learned that lesson last year with the Bijan and the Tyler Algier experience in Atlanta, and seeing how utilizing two capable backs there, as well as Russell Wilson does not have a history of checking the ball down or feeding running backs to the passing game there either, right? Justin Fields, that hasn't really been his forte either. So this is one of those that I think Najee will at least see the volume play there. And again, not going to surprise me if we see a running back here with 250 plus carries and him break another 1,000 yards on the ground and see 7 or 8 touchdowns. So I think on the running side of things, it's probably very similar, rinse and repeat. And this is one of those that now you're able to draft Najee closer to what the true value is coming off the board than what you've seen in years past. And in years past, that draft capital was so high, when you spent that type of capital and what you got out of it, you were disappointed. At least this year, you're kind of just, you're drafting what you get kind of thing there, right? Like, this is going to be one of those that we see a giant outlier on either way of the ADP on this one, I don't think. Any other thoughts on Najee Harris?
I think my final thought is if there's going to be a separation for Najee, it's because this dude is going to run pissed off when he gets the ball. The Steelers declined his 5th-year option, so he knows that more than likely this is his last year in Pittsburgh, and I think he's going to go out and again push for that contract, right? We talked about DeAndre Swift doing it in Philly. I think Najee is going to be doing it here in Pittsburgh. So if he's running angry and is able to get again that 250, 260 type touch workload in the backfield, he's doing it with dollar bills in mind. So that would be one reason why I would be willing to take a gamble on Najee in some instances, because I love guys in a contract year.
Fair enough. Alrighty, let's go ahead and hit up Aaron Jones, and Aaron Jones with a little bit of scenery change this year, going from Green Bay to Minnesota. Last year in Green Bay, 142 rush attempts, 656 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, had 30 receptions on 43 targets for 233 yards and 1 touchdown through the air. Thoughts on Aaron Jones?
Aaron Jones scares me this year, guys. Like, he just does. Like, I don't trust the Vikings offensive line. I don't trust necessarily what they're doing at quarterback. Maybe he works out the very beginning of the year because Addison's more than likely going to get suspended, right? You have Hawkinson, who's recovering from his injury. So I think maybe he gets some use right away. But honestly, year long, it scares me. I don't think he's going to play, all 17 games. He's only done that once in his entire career. So it really bothers me on what Jones is going to be able to do, because I don't see you feeding him the ball more than 200 times. Like, he's just not quite built for that. He's not going to magically at the age of 29 take 240 touches and be able to hold up with the pounding that he takes. So he is a guy that I'm staying away from. Like, I think this guy has big time bust written all over him this year.
I will politely disagree. I think that Aaron Jones, while there are concerns about will you get, more than 12 games out of him, I think those are very real concerns. I do think if you get more than the 11 that he played last year, I think you're at least getting 700 yards. Touchdowns were disappointing, but I think that's because he was playing second fiddle there, or at least, having to share the backfield in Green Bay. That's not the case in Minnesota. I'm looking at this Minnesota depth chart, and it is not enticing running back wise after Aaron Jones. And what makes me think that Aaron Jones will be a great option in Minnesota is that I don't know who the quarterback is. So if you want to take some of the pressure off your quarterback, you establish a run game, and you do that by getting your running back involved. So I actually am big on Aaron Jones this year. I think getting him at RB 19, I could see him finishing, just because if he plays a full season, right, which I'm not sure that he does, but if he plays a full season, he can flirt with RB, the high end of RB2 there, right? So to me, there's value. To me, that's value, and I see that, I guess, a different way. Not often do I disagree with Kevin, and if we're going to be honest here, if anybody is listening to this, you should probably listen to Kevin. He's much better at this than I am, but I see it differently.
Fair enough. Aaron Jones is a guy that I don't know that I'm going to necessarily be putting on my fantasy roster either, right? Like, this is one of those that I think this is probably a bit of an overdraft here. Now, I can understand the appeal on this one, and Alex makes some good points with the fact of what the Minnesota Vikings backfield looks like at this point. The one of the biggest problems, though, is the fact that it seemingly is that we're going to see the Sam Darnold bridge quarterback into the JJ McCarthy era for Vikings football here, right? And the last time we've really really every time we've seen Sam Darnold take the field as a starting quarterback, it doesn't necessarily translate to good things on the NFL from an NFL standpoint, right? Like, but yet somehow kind of everybody, listening to a lot of these things, him spending a season in San Francisco playing backup there somehow has corrected all of these years and everything that we've seen before this on the Sam Darnold experience, right? So I don't know that we're going to see a lot of change there. JJ McCarthy coming in, well, it'll be interesting to see how he picks up this offense and how he adapts to the NFL side of things and the NFL game there. But all of those types of things there, I don't know that we're going to see much out of Aaron Jones this season when it's all said and done, right? Like he had a couple of kind of burst type of games, couple of bigger games down the stretch there. But there's a lot of times not healthy and a lot of times too when even throughout the season just failed to deliver in a much better offense in Green Bay last season than what I think we'll see here. So I'm not that sold on Aaron Jones this year. Any other thoughts on Aaron Jones?
Stop me when I say a name that you've heard before. Henry Bird, Blake Brandel, Michael Juergens, Walter Rouse, Doug Nestor, Spencer Rowland, Brian O'Neill, Christian Darrisaw.
Yep.
Okay.
Hey, you're going through the Vikings offensive line, aren't you?
That's their offensive line. You're telling me that this cast of characters is going to be able to keep gaps open for Aaron Jones?
Maybe. I mean, you make a good point.
That's my final word. That's it. That's what I had to end with.
I like how you got down to Christian Darrisaw, and that's where the light bulb clicked on, hey, that's the Vikings offensive line, right? Like,
yeah, the next one's going to be Dalton Reisner, and I knew you guys.
We all knew who he is.
Yes.
Yeah, we all know who Dalton Reisner is.
But we know who Dalton Reisner is because of, he's a Colorado kid. Yeah. And not only that, right? He's a Colorado high school kid even. So, but yeah, so interestingly enough, right? Like those are the names that start clicking on that one. So, all righty. Let's go ahead and move on to the next guy, unless there's any other thoughts on Aaron Jones. All right. Let's head over to Ramondre Stevenson. And Ramondre Stevenson last year, 156 rushing attempts, 619 yards, 4 touchdowns, 38 receptions on 51 targets for 238 yards to the air. Thoughts on Ramondre Stevenson?
So this is a guy I'm in on, and I just haven't been able to get my hands on him. But I really like Ramondre here. He got paid, and I think that they're going to use him like crazy in New England. So got dinged up a little bit last year. Zeke definitely took some of that pressure off of him with what they were doing with only just over 200 total touches. But the year before that, right, 2022, his kind of breakout year. What was it? Basically 300 total touches for just under 1,500 yards and 6 touchdowns. Like, I think that's really what you're going to get back this year. So the fact that you're getting him at RB 18 for a fringe running back 1 in an offense that really doesn't have a whole lot. They're going to have to run the ball to stay in there. Antonio Gibson and Jermichael Hasty are the guys behind him. That's no threat. So if they can find a way to keep the ball moving on third down, I think Ramondre Stevenson is going to see a ton of work in New England this year. And for a guy that you can pick up, they're in the 60s. It's not a bad option for an RB2. If you're kind of going later for your RB2 and you're kind of loading up there in between, it's not a terrible option if you're really waiting on running back, right? Because we kind of did the round breakdown. So what if you load up in the first, second, third, fourth round? Just load up on receiver. You load up on receiver. 5th round, Ramondre Stevenson. 6th round, David Montgomery. 7th round, Raheem Mostert.
Sign me up.
Pretty pleased with that.
Right. So at that point, do you give a leap of where you drafted these guys at the end of the season? Because you're looking at this roster and what their share of the backfield is going to be. You have the red zone work of Montgomery. You have the electric playmaking ability of Raheem Mostert. You feel like you're set, right? And you can pivot in and out. And because you have 4 receivers drafted in front of that, you don't even have to play these guys in the flex. You can rotate receivers through the flex if one of these guys get nicked up, and you're not damned. So again, we'll get into it more on draft strategy, but setting it up and kind of having an idea of what you would like to do. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Thank you, Mike Tyson. And I completely understand that. But this isn't a bad game plan to come in with. And then if it falters, you pivot. Right? You just pivot. If Montgomery's gone, maybe you take Connor and then come back with Mostert. If Mostert's gone, okay, maybe you pivot off a running back. Maybe that you grab your tight end in round 7 or grab your quarterback in round 7. And then you kind of see where the rest of this falls out. Like plenty of different options. We'll get into it. All I'm saying is I like Ramondre a lot this year. I liked him last year, and I felt like it was going to lead into some things, but he played dinged up a lot and then missed some time on top of that. So, kind of let some fantasy owners down a little bit, but I think the potential was there, right? Still just under 4 yards per carry. So that was down a little bit, actually quite a bit, a full yard from where he was at in 2022. But I think a lot of that was because no one trusted Mac Jones to get the ball down the field, right? No one trusted him to get the ball down the field. It doesn't matter whether it's Drake May or Jacoby Brissett. They will push the ball down the field. Drake May more so. But Jacoby Brissett can run an offense. It's his second stint in New England there. He knows how to be a professional. He knows how to prepare. He can get you through the first part of the season until Drake May is truly ready to up and go. And then May will push the ball down the field. He likes to push the ball down the field. So it will open up things. If he can connect on them, it'll keep safeties in check, right? There's a clear path to success for Mondre. So I'm all in on him this year.
I will agree with Kevin, and I think it'll be interesting to see, and I hope when we revisit, Ramondre Stevenson next year, that if it's the even years that you want Ramondre Stevenson, because the odd years so far have not been his best years in terms of stats, but the even year, the only one, 2022, great year, right? It's like the San Francisco Giants there back in the late aughts, where it was an even year that meant that they were winning the World Series. Like if that's going to be what it is, then stranger things, right? So if we know, we'll see if this pattern continues this year. I agree with Kevin though. I like a Ramondre Stevenson. I like where you're getting him at, and I like the fact that he's likely going to finish well in front of running back 18, well ahead of running back 18. I think I would be shocked if he's outside of the top 12 with what they're going to do there in New England, with the offense that they have, with the defense that they'll have. I think that he is like one of the guys that I would be shocked if he finishes outside running back 1 territory.
Fair enough. And yes, like Ramondre Stevenson is a guy that I certainly don't have a problem putting on my fantasy roster here, right? Like this is a guy that, and Kevin illustrated the point very well. Like this is a 0 RB type of guy that you can go through and add as your first running back on your roster, right? And be happy with a roster that you're able to construct there. This is a guy too that if I'm going through and I'm adding him as my second RB, I'm even happier about that one there, right? Like there's a lot of potential, a lot of upside here for this season. And I do think that we're going to see some really good things out of Ramondre Stevenson. And at worst case, right, with this one, kind of showcasing here, at worst case, I think that this is still a guy that we're going to see somewhere around 220 to 225 touches on the ground. Just rushing work on this thing. I'd be surprised if we see Ramondre get less than 4 yards a carry. So this is a guy that I think at the end of the season, we're going to see at least 225 on the ground and 1,000 yards and see probably 6-7 touchdowns on the ground there as well, right? Like that is some very good value for where you're drafting him and something that will probably be very consistent for your fantasy roster there as well, going down the stretch out of the RB position. Any other thoughts on Ramondre Stevenson? All righty, let's go ahead and hit up the next guy on the list, Alvin Kamara. And Alvin Kamara last year, 180 rush attempts, 694 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, 75 receptions, 86 yards for 466 yards and 1 touchdown through the air. Thoughts on Alvin Kamara?
I believe that you're looking at a top 8 back last year if he wasn't suspended to start the season and missed the first few games, 4 games. So back to 75 receptions. That's one thing that Carr got right last year, was feeding Kamara through the air. One note of change with this New Orleans Saints offense is they are changing to basically the Kubiak zone run offense. What does that typically do for running backs? Right? You see career years when they haven't been in that offense to when they have. So, if Alvin Kamara, you'll see 220 carries, and I'm assuming another, we'll call it 68 receptions. We'll call it just shy of 70 if we're going to hedge our bets here a little bit. That's still well within RB1 territory. And he only scored 6 touchdowns last year. It's not like he blew the world up. So if he's able to get 7 or 8 in, you're back in RB1 territory. So the fact that you're getting him at 57 overall, RB17 overall, yes, please. Yes, please. I'll take a gamble on him, age 29. And I know Kendre Miller's behind him, and we really like him a lot for what he can do and his big play capability. But as far as I'm concerned, AK is the guy in New Orleans until he's not. And this offense will flow through him in this Kubiak-style zone-running offense. We will see his most efficient year on the ground ever. It would not surprise me to see him flirt with 1,000 yards on the ground. And if you're able to tack on another 400 yards through the air, which is consistently what he's been able to do, if not more, his entire career, you're looking at 14, 15, maybe even 1,600 all-purpose yards. And that is good enough to be well within RB1 territory, regardless of what touchdowns do. So I like Alvin Kamara this year. I think he's going to be a very nice little fantasy darling for people who decide to pick him up there at 57.
I'll agree with you. I will throw a couple things out there that I think maybe like touchdowns. It would be nice to see touchdowns come back up, right? And I think there's a couple things working against him for the touchdowns. Jamal Williams also on this roster, big bruiser, right? So goal line work, if there is any down there in New Orleans, like that could be a bit of an issue.
Isn't he like 34 now?
Jamal Williams is the same age as Alvin Kamara. They are both 29.
Really?
Yeah. It feels like Jamal Williams has been in the league for 25 years, but yeah. Same with Alvin Kamara. Doesn't it feel like Alvin Kamara has been in the league for 1,000 years too? It's only going, he's 29. So that is something that concerns me, and that's where touchdowns go, right? Touchdowns will go to that bruising back if they get down to goal line work. It doesn't happen often, but it happens enough that it would hawk away from Kamara. So that's a little bit of a concern. But I think that what all of the points that Kevin laid out are enough to squash those concerns and keep them at bay for me.
Fair enough.
So, over under 120 carries for Jamal Williams.
Way under.
I would say under, but I think that of those 100, I think if he gets to 100 carries, you're maybe looking at 250 yards, but there could be 5 touchdowns in there, and that's 5 touchdowns that didn't go to Alvin Kamara.
Fair enough.
So I'm to be honest, I'm not concerned with the Jamal Williams touchdown.
Taysom Hill concerns me more than Jamal Williams.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
another great
personally.
point. That's another great point. That's another touchdown hawk, right? It's just there's touchdown hawks on there, and that's what sucks for Alvin Kamara is like you want to see those touchdowns go up, but
If he gets 70 catches, I don't need 10 touchdowns.
it's fair.
Right.
I need 7.
And at that point, right, when it came down to red zone work, right, last year, for New Orleans, Alvin Kamara had 38 rushing attempts in the red zone. Jamal Williams 10, right? Like that's one of those that doesn't necessarily concern me that much on that front. With the Taysom Hill side of things, though, that certainly does, because he had 27 rushing attempts inside the red zone there, and at that point, most of the Taysom Hill work was inside really kind of inside the 10 type of thing, because he had 17 of those 27 carries inside the 10-yard line, right? So like that's where some of that could kind of scare me off that a little bit. But if you have a running back that's still getting that kind of volume inside the in the red zone and in those valuable type of areas, Alvin Kamara was still top 15 at that point among running backs with missing time, and having the vultures of Jamal Williams and Taysom Hill, right? Like there's still plenty of opportunity in there. And the fact that we, what we're going to see out of New Orleans offense this year, going to that Kubiak zone blocking, zone run type of scheme, I think that we're going to see some really good things here. And I think that we may see the Alvin Kamara efficiency tick back up, because that was kind of always the thing with Alvin Kamara, right? Like when he was really dominant in fantasy, wasn't necessarily because of a volume play. The seasons that he got the most volumes were some of his most awful fantasy seasons out there. So this is a deal that I'm not that concerned about that. I think that we will see Alvin Kamara tick up here. And this is a guy that you're drafting as a middle RB2 that I think will return RB1 type of value. So I'm in on Alvin Kamara. Any other thoughts on Alvin Kamara? All righty, let's go ahead and head on over to Kenneth Walker. And Kenneth Walker last year, 219 rush attempts, 905 yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, 29 receptions on 37 targets, 259 yards, and 1 touchdown through the air. Thoughts on Kenneth Walker?
So Kenneth Walker kind of came out of the gates last year on a tear, and then fought injuries the rest of the season. Missed a ton of practice, missed a couple games, but still was getting fed on game day. So I like Kenneth Walker. I like him to return to form, being fully healthy. He has big playability like we saw his rookie year. Yes, that was missing a little bit last year, but again, I think some of the injuries were adding to that. Zach Charbonnet is probably going to see a little bit more of the passing work. Like, we understand that, but nevertheless, the Seattle team's good enough and they're competitive enough that they're going to be in a lot of games, right? They're going to be in a lot of games. New offensive coordinator coming over from Washington. So it's more of a downfield type offense than it is check down to your back. They like to push the ball down. DK, good year. I think JSN, good year. Tyler Lockett, I think we'll start to see some decline. But as far as Walker goes, he's clearly going to be the lead back there. We saw that last year, 63. By the time the season averaged out, I think it's a bit misleading. Like, it's looking like 54% of the snap share. But really, before he got hurt, he was upwards of 65% of the snap share. So I think some of that trend continues. And as long as his efficiencies stay intact, I think we're going to see a ton of Kenneth Walker this year. So I like him a lot. I like the way that this Seattle offense is set up this year. I think they're sneaky good, that people probably aren't giving them enough credit because they don't believe in Geno Smith and what this offense can really do. But I think it's very good value for Walker here at 16. I think he's going to flirt with RB1 territory. And as long as he's able to stay healthy, I'd tell you that this is about the floor. So Not necessarily a great value on Kenneth Walker. Maybe he pushes up towards RB 12, 11, 10, possibly, depending on how the season shakes out for him. But getting him at RB 16, I'm okay with that. Like, I think it's there. Push come to shove in a redraft, I'd rather have Alvin Kamara this season.
I dig his playoff push schedule. Once you get past week 11, that's pretty favorable for him. Got a couple games against Arizona in there, game at New York, home against Green Bay, home against Minnesota in week 16, and then at Chicago week 17. A little scary. That's a Thursday night game, day after Christmas, I think. So that's a little bit of a concern. But if it's cold and snowy in Chicago, guess what they're going to do? Run the football. That's what you need there in your fantasy championship out of your running back. So I agree. I like Kenneth Walker. I'll be intrigued to see what the new OC does, how they utilize him there. I think that's another team that I will have to pay attention to, what training camp reports look like. And how he looks in the new offense, but I've got a soft spot for Kenneth Walker. I don't know if I'm keeping him this year in the home league, but I would have to very much evaluate that possibility.
Fair enough.
I dare you to think about it.
Huh?
I said you got a day or two to think about it.
I do.
Right. Fair enough. And so with
3 months to think about the trade I sent you.
Alrighty. So with Kenneth Walker, I do think that we're going to see some really good things here again, right? Like, again, this is a guy that feels like you're almost drafting him at his floor. Will likely out-compete that, outshine that, and very well could finish inside RB1 territory when this thing's all said and done. And I think that's the offensive kind of change in philosophy that we see on this thing is actually going to help out their run game a little bit more so than what we've seen in the past, right? With Seattle, it was that plotting type of, just running offense. They're going to run first and then try and set up everything off of that. I think we're going to see a little bit of the inverse, right? They're going to utilize the pass and then the running work will actually be a little bit more opened up there. As well, with safeties having to kind of stay back and not necessarily seeing some of these loaded boxes that we've seen in the past here. So I do think that Kenneth Walker has a season that he can out ADP. Any other thoughts on Kenneth Walker? All righty, let's go ahead and hit up Joe Mixon. And Joe Mixon last year, 257 rush attempts, 1,034 yards, 9 touchdowns, 52 receptions on 64 targets, 376 yards, and 3 touchdowns to the air. Thoughts on Joe Mixon?
So I'm not convinced that Joe Mixon's touchdowns won't regress, right? He had 12. I wouldn't be surprised if he falls back into that 8 or 9 overall territory. But I think the rest of the numbers kind of hold up true overall. Like, I think we see him just over 1,000 yards. The 52 receptions I do find interesting also, right? So that might be a little bit difficult only because there's a lot of mouths to feed in Houston all of a sudden. A lot of mouths between Schultz, Diggs, Collins, and Dell, and you're adding Joe Mixon into the list. Like, great weapon to have and help keep defenses honest. So I do think he's going to have a lot of clear running lanes to go through, but I'm not sure how much passing work he's going to see overall. So I could see that drop from 52 to maybe like 38, 39 catches, something like that over the course of the season. So I don't know that RB5 is necessarily in the cards, but I still feel like getting him at RB15 is a value. And with this offense and what the expectations are in Houston overall, to get him at RB15 and feel pretty confident that he's going to be knocking on the door at RB1, there is value built in there, even if it's only slight with the touchdown regression and probably reception total regression.
I will agree with that, and I think that there are a lot of expectations in Houston, and it's an intriguing team this year. Year 2 of CJ Stroud, you've got all of the wide receiver options that CJ Stroud has. I mean, I think a lot of teams would take what Houston has as their second listed wide receivers as their first 3 wide receivers, and just this team has high expectations. I think Joe Mixon, while he will be the number 1 back, may not always be the featured back. It'll be interesting to see how they kind of use some of those backs there, and work them in. I think if he is the number 1 back, then yes, there's a path to RB1 territory. But I could also see a place where they kind of spread the wealth out a little bit, and I think that would hamper him, because, like Kevin said, there are a ton of mouths to feed, and still on this roster is Dameon Pierce, Dare Ogunbowale, and it's probably the only 2 that you're going to really care about. But those are 2 other running backs that could eat into some of Joe Mixon's work. So a little bit concerned about that. That is a concern that I have, and I'd like to see how things play out, how things are looking over the course of a preseason before I make a decision on Joe Mixon.
Fair enough. I'm not concerned about Joe Mixon's workload in Houston, right? Like, this is a guy that I think we're still going to see get somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 touches on the ground, if nothing else, right? Like, while yes, we may see some regression through the passing work, but I think that regression is still somewhere in the 40 to 50 reception range, right? Like, even 40, right? Like 40 to 50 kind of in there. So I think that we're going to see some of that play out there. We'll probably see some regression in touchdowns, but I think we're probably going to go from like 12 to 10 when it's all said and done. I'm not concerned about any of these backs behind him really challenging him for touches and for snap share and any of those kind of metrics there. Joe Mixon is one of the few running backs that actually gets stronger as the game goes, right? Like, as the defense kind of breaks down, you see him start excelling even more and more through that. The only concern that I really have with Joe Mixon right now is, and it's something that's worth monitoring any time that the old hamstring reports kind of come up of a hamstring injury into training camps there. So that's something that I will be, kind of monitoring and looking into as that kind of goes. We've seen that where, seasons past, those early reports of hamstrings come through, and really want to see what that looks like going down the stretch here. Any other thoughts on Joe Mixon? All righty. Let's go ahead and hit up our next guy on the list, and that is James Cook. And James Cook last year, 237 rush attempts, 1,122 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 44 receptions for 54 targets, 445 yards, and 4 touchdowns to the air. Thoughts on James Cook?
Dude needs a couple red zone opportunities, for God's sake. Like, I like James Cook. I think his passing work's going to go up. There's a ton of targets that left Buffalo between Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs. So I think James Cook is still going to see a big, a big overall workload. Wouldn't surprise me to see him just north of 300 total touches. It's just a matter of whether he can get it in the end zone or not, right? 6 total touchdowns sounds pretty okay, but for him to be up in this value, you'd really like him to be in that 8 to 10 range, realistically, for it to kind of pay off the way you want it to. And I think he can get there, but I think a lot of it's going to be coming out of this receiving work. So his biggest deal is he's got to keep the ball, right? He can't be putting the ball on the ground. But I do think we will see a shift in Buffalo. Like, they were at their best last year when they fed James Cook early and often. They got him involved in games. They got him into the passing game. They were able to run him and get him outside and into space. And now they need to, because Josh Allen can't do all this on his own. And as good as Dalton Kincaid is, he is not going to absorb an extra 270 targets or whatever the heck it was between all the receivers that left town. So, I like the appeal of James Cook here. I think the value is fair for James Cook. 14. He finished RB 11 last year. I think you could see something similar. I mean, heck, he had 15, almost 1,600 total yards of offense last year. Like, that was pretty solid. So, if he's able to duplicate that similar total yardage in one capacity or another, and maybe fall into the end zone another one or two times, you're creeping up into RB, 8, 9 type status. And again, so there's a little bit of value there drafting him at, RB 14. So someone's got to get the ball in Buffalo, and I'm not sure that I trust any of the receivers overall. So, that leaves Josh Allen or James Cook, and I'm not spending a third round pick on Josh Allen. So, i.e. James Cook.
I don't know what Buffalo did to the schedule makers to piss them off, but holy cow, it's brutal. That's a brutal schedule that they've got. I know statistically it will be impossible for them to play playoff teams, to play all playoff teams. That is statistically impossible, but man, do they've got some tough games in front of them. Not only do they get the AFC South, so Houston, Tennessee, Indianapolis, Jacksonville, they also get the NFC West, Seattle, San Francisco, LA, and Arizona. Like, brutal, just brutal to get both of those this year. And then your one-off game, Kansas City. Like, let's just throw in the Chiefs.
And Detroit.
And Detroit. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for including that. So a couple one-offs against Kansas City and Detroit. So holy cow, that's brutal. Yeah, I think James Cook, we saw him as a featured back. I think that they're going to need to do that again if they want to be successful. And I think, honestly, looking at this schedule, to take some pressure off of Josh Allen, they're going to need James Cook to be effective running the football against some of these defenses. So where he is here at 14, yeah, 14 feels about right for James Cook. So I think it's what you see is what you get.
Fair enough. James Cook certainly has a lot of upside there, right? Like, a lot of intrigue, a lot of upside on this one. This is a guy, though, that I don't know that I necessarily would want to be putting on my running back or putting on my roster as my running back one to it, right? Like, this is a guy that I would certainly not mind putting him as my running back two, right? But if going through like a 0 RB, hero RB type of strategy, I guess it'd be a 0 RB at that point, right? Like, if I'm going through that, this is not the guy that I want leading, being the anchor for my running back room for my fantasy roster, right? Like, there's a lot of upside, lots of really good things, right? When Joe Brady took over the offense through the last, weeks 11 through 18, James Cook was certainly involved, averaging over 100 yards a game to it, seeing lots of touches, seeing lots of opportunity there. This is a guy, though, that doesn't see much work when it comes to the red zone, right? Didn't see it last year. I don't think that really changes much this year. We know that Josh Allen will vulture touchdowns, rushing touchdowns to it. They also went out and drafted Ray Davis, who very well could be the goal line red zone type of running back there as well, and is definitely a bit more of a thumper inside the tackles type of thing there. So James Cook, this will be one of those that when we look up the end of the season, yes, he'll probably be around about 1,000 yards rushing, but where he'll make his mark is if there's that 500 or 600 yards through the air on this one. And that could be where the difference is. So a guy that has running back one upside, but for my fantasy roster, I want to view him more as my running back two, potentially even running back three type of option there. Any other thoughts on James Cook?
So I don't know the specific stat, and I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but I'm going to say it anyway. I cannot think of a player who touched the ball outside of the 10-yard line who got tackled inside the 5-yard line more than James Cook did last year. And again, it is what it is, right? And just what Alex said, some of it's bad luck. So the hope is, right, if he's able to break one, this defender slips, whatever, and he's able to fall into the end zone a couple more times, I think you're there. And I don't know that it's completely impossible for him to have 70 receptions out of the backfield. Like, even if they give up some of his rushing work, right? They give some to Ray Davis because they like him and kind of use him inside the 5 or even inside the 10, something like that. So even if you give up some of that rushing work because he wasn't scoring the touchdowns anyway, but you garner an extra 25 receptions out of the deal, you're net positive as a fantasy owner with James Cook. So I think part of that is the appeal that I really like for it too, is we don't really know what this offense is going to truly look like with a revamped receiving core, with Josh Allen needing to create chemistry with kind of all these guys outside of Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. There's plenty of opportunity here for James Cook to work himself into a massive workload for Buffalo, much like Alvin Kamara-esque of his younger years.
Fair enough. Any other thoughts on James Cook? All right, let's go ahead and hit up Rachaad White. And Rachaad White last year, 272 rush attempts, 990 yards on the ground, 6 touchdowns, 64 receptions on 70 targets, 549 yards through the air, and 3 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Rachaad White?
My snap decision here is give me all the Rachaad White. If I get him middle of the 3rd round, which is where he's going right now, that gives me the opportunity to go receiver. I can go receiver again 2nd round if I'm drafting middle 3rd, because it's about where he's going there. Give me all the Rachaad White. Like, I think that this guy is going to have a good year. It just feels like this team in Tampa Bay with Baker still at the helm, Evans, Godwin, like, they were good last year. There's no reason to believe that they won't be good again this year. I think that I would be very happy if Rachaad White's the first running back that I take in the draft, and give me all of it.
Yeah, I think just for the volume alone, this is you're drafting him at his floor at RB 13, right? The biggest thing with White is I would like for him to be a bit more efficient running the ball. 3.6 yards per carry is not pretty. It's actually pretty damn low on the efficiency scale as you start measuring out all these backs. But at 270 carries, I'll take that, right? And again, he was hyper efficient in the passing game. 70 targets for 64 receptions. I'm good with that. And Baker's shown he's not afraid to do that. He will check it down. So I think the volume is there. And that's what Rachaad White is. It is a volume play because you do get it on both sides. 9 touchdowns. That was very solid. You'd like for that to stay the same. It'd be great if you could get it to kick up 1 or 2, but RB 13, I agree with Alex. Like, if I'm going wide receiver, and then I have White staring me down in the 3rd round, yes, please. And Derek and I actually implemented this earlier in a draft that we're co-owning in, where we were able to get White as our RB1 in a 14 team draft at the end of the 3rd round. So we were ecstatic to have White fall into our lap there.
Yep. Yeah, and Rachaad White is is definitely the volume play type of deal, right? Like, very Leonard Fournette-esque Tampa Bay version Leonard Fournette, right? Like, the volume was there, got to RB1 status based off the volume, but the efficiencies were just awful, right? And that's what we saw out of Rachaad White last season, right? With 270 carries and not getting to 1,000 yards on the ground, right? But the rushing work the passing work was certainly there, and the volume certainly there. So this is a guy that, yes, they brought in Bucky Irving through the draft, but I don't think that we're going to see Bucky Irving really challenge Rachaad White for touches this season. And so I am very much all in on Rachaad White, thinking that this is a guy that we're going to see you'll certainly deliver inside RB1 numbers for you.
Well, one more note, depending on what you're looking at, but his strength of schedule, second easiest.
This is delightful.
Yeah. So just another reason that Rachaad White should be on your radar, and why I think anybody who gets their hands on him, if he stays healthy, will be very happy.
All righty. Any other thoughts on Rachaad White? All righty. Let's go ahead and hit up next guy on the list, Josh Jacobs. And Josh Jacobs last year with Las Vegas, 233 rush attempts, 805 yards, 6 touchdowns, 37 receptions on 54 targets, 296 yards, and 0 touchdowns to the air. Thoughts on Josh Jacobs?
Jacobs is a guy I thought I was really going to like in Green Bay, and now I'm almost worried that there's just too many damn mouths. Green Bay has a embarrassment of talent at the wide receiver position. They just paid Jordan Love. They have 2 very good young tight ends. You have Jacobs that you brought into the fold. A.J. Dillon is kind of the guy who's been there and understands the offense. And then you drafted Marshawn Lloyd on top of that. So there's a lot of mouths in Green Bay currently. Jacobs will have top billing, but I don't think that he is the guy I want in this range. I think I would be more comfortable grabbing a Rachaad White, a James Cook, a Joe Mixon, as opposed to Josh Jacobs. And so because of that, he's just not going to land on a whole lot of my fantasy rosters. If I want a piece of Green Bay, I'm going after, one of the wide receivers or maybe Jordan Love. That's kind of what I'm going after. I don't know that I'm necessarily going after Jacobs, knowing that the coaching staff is already pumping up Marshawn Lloyd, even though he was on the PUP list to start. A.J. Dillon, I'm not overly concerned about him. But you just paid your quarterback, and typically that means you want to show off his shiny right arm. So I expect a little bit more passing coming out of Green Bay. So he's going to need a lot of receptions to kick that up. He's going to have to get up in the 50, 56 range, something like that, to kind of balance out where I think he's going to have some shortcomings running the ball.
It feels like if you take him here, this is his absolute ceiling. I don't know how you see him get past running back 12 overall. And I feel like it's more likely that running back 12 overall is kind of a pipe dream, and it would be a little bit less with everything that they have going on there in Green Bay. Like you said, Kevin, all the mouths to feed. So I agree with you. I am not in on Josh Jacobs, not where you have to take him at the start of the 3rd round. And I just don't think that you're going to get the return on investment there.
Yeah, fair enough. This is one that last season, right? Like Josh Jacobs was coming off of a massive production season the year before. And then coming into last season, had the contract kind of issue, had a lot of the training camp reports, and would he even be available for the season? Lots of things leading into last season, and it really just didn't pan out anything for fantasy production there, right? Like, was a guy that when we saw him on the field, certainly didn't look like the Josh Jacobs of old, and the guy that we had used to really kind of see go out there and be hyper efficient, garnering well over 4 yards a carry, and this was a worse yards per carry that we've seen in his entire career at 3.5 yards per carry. Now, one would hope with Green Bay, they've got a little bit better offensive line up there, and so that could potentially improve some of the efficiencies there. But this is one where I don't know that we're going to see Josh Jacobs get into the 260, 270 touches that we've been used to seeing in that massive volume play that we saw him when he was with the Raiders. This is going to be one of those that I think we're going to have to hope for around about 200 carries. Hope that the efficiencies tick up so that he can see somewhere around 800 or somewhere between 800 and 900 yards. And this might be something that when we look up, we're hopeful that we see 7 to 8 touchdowns. So I do think that this is one of those that, Alex, you said it just a moment ago, you drafted him at his ceiling. I think that's about right. Like, this is RB2 type of deal that you're having to draft as an RB1 right now. And at that point, he has been moving steadily down my draft boards. Any other thoughts on Josh Jacobs? Alrighty, let's go ahead and take a look at the next guy here. And last guy of the evening, that is Isaiah Pacheco. And last season, Isaiah Pacheco, 205 rush attempts, 935 yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, 44 receptions on 49 targets, 244 yards, and 2 touchdowns through the air. Thoughts on Isaiah Pacheco?
I like him if he can stay healthy, but I need him to stay on the field. The dude's a violent, stinking runner, right?
Good God, yes.
He is a violent runner. Now, the hopes is that we should be seeing some improvement out of Pacheco, because bringing in Xavier Worthy, bringing in Hollywood Brown will push those safeties back, right? Isaiah Pacheco, 4.5 yards per carry last year, even with safeties cheating in, right? Now, part of that was they're still blanketing Kelsey, but I think they finally have this offense and enough good playmakers. This Rashee Rice deal, the fact that there still hasn't been a suspension levied is very interesting. Like, we are very, very quickly approaching the fact that they're not going to deal with it this year. Like, they're going to deal with it next year. So that will be interesting in itself, because it's one more weapon for Mahomes to throw the ball to. So I don't mind Pacheco here. Like, I think there is a bit of a gamble. Like, I think it's fair value. This is probably about the ceiling. Like, RB11, I don't see him going any higher than like RB9, but I also don't see him going really any lower than where he was last year with missing 3 games. And realistically, if he's going to be able to play, 15 or 16 games, that RB16 finish easily creeps up to RB14, and you're kind of right there in the range. Again, it's, do you want a piece of Kansas City? Do you want to pay up at tight end and draft Travis Kelce? Do you want to pay up and draft Patrick Mahomes, which I don't think is a bad idea this year? If you want quarterback early, that's perfectly fine. Or are you going to go for a different option, right? Are you going Pacheco? Are you looking at Hollywood Brown? Are you looking at Rice? Those types of things. So I don't mind him, especially if you are a big believer that the Kansas City offense is just primed to absolutely explode this year, now that they have reliable handed playmakers surrounding Travis Kelce. I don't know that I mind that, but I do think that of the last 5 guys, maybe Josh Jacobs excluded, but Pacheco, White, Cook, Mixon, we'll say out of those guys, because we liked all of them, Pacheco probably has the most risk out of those guys. Like, he probably has the hardest path, just because Kansas City does just seemingly they just pivot. Like, they don't care what you're doing. They're just going to find a way around it. Very much how New England, in a lot of ways, ran their offense. Well, that's fine. You guys are really good at this, so we'll attack this kind of in the first half to make it seem like it, and we're going to keep sprinkling these gash plays, and before you know it, you're down by 20 points. Like, Kansas City, I think, is going to do something kind of similar here this year. So I like Pacheco. I don't know that I love Pacheco here. Is kind of my overall feeling about it, but I think it's fair value taking him off at running back 11.
As a Broncos fan, I hate everything you just said, because you just said, man, Kansas City got better.
They did.
And the damn team was the Super Bowl, they're defending Super Bowl champions. So, like, yeah, wait. When will it end? Yeah, I think where Pacheco is, I agree with you, Kevin. I think this is about fair value, right? He finished running back 14 last year, missed some time last year. No reason to think that he finishes below running back 14 just because of the team that he's on. But again, because of the team that he's on, there's no reason to believe that he's going to finish anywhere super high above that. So I have a tough time, I guess. I'm right there with you, Kevin. I have a tough time here, 3rd round, to spend it on Pacheco. Although, again, you could go wide receiver, and then if you're there pick 36 and Pacheco's still there, that's not a bad option. It's not a bad option, but there is a little bit more risk because I think of all the teams, maybe Miami might be another team that is just like hot hand, but hot hand in that it's a different running back. In Kansas City, it's hot hand, and it could be a wide receiver. It could be Travis Kelce. It could be, they decide to run 6 offensive linemen and have one be eligible every play. Like, it's just, it is that dynamic of an offense that it does scare the ever living out of me. The one that I'm sure of that if you're gonna get a piece of this Kansas City offense, and the one that I'm sure of that you'll absolutely want, it's Patrick Mahomes, because he's the one who's orchestrating all of it.
Fair enough. Isaiah Pacheco is a guy that, every time I'm on the clock and I'm staring that down and I'm like, okay, do I go running back here? Do I not go running back here? He's a guy that I end up not going with in a lot of cases, right? Like, and yeah, not really anything that stands out when I'm on the clock making that decision. But this is a guy that when we see him on the field, he's explosive, he's dynamic. I honestly feel sorry for the ground when he starts running, because I'm worried that the ground is going to get hurt from how angry he is when he's running and stomping on the ground, moving through there. So all of that to say that there's lots of positive things here, right? When we look at this, as far as explosive plays, he's on an offense that can put up explosive plays that we anticipate being very good, that we anticipate having lots of points put up, having lots of attempts inside the red zone. And even with that being said, like, he had lots of very valuable touches inside the red zone last year. This is a guy that when I'm staring that down, I just have a hard time hitting draft on. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that while we know what Kansas City is going to do, we don't know what Kansas City is going to do on offense there, right? And so one of those that it just have a hard time kind of relying on that being what would be my running back one in a lot of cases, because when you see him go out there and finish, he gets to where he is season long because of a lot of kind of steady performances there, but those steady performances in RB2 territory more so than RB1 territory. And even the games that he does finish in RB1 type of thing there, it's typically because of a touchdown upside there, more so than a volume play. And I want more of the volume play for my running back one. Any other thoughts on Isaiah Pacheco? All righty. Well, guys, that's going to take us down to the end of the guys we're covering tonight. Any final thoughts out there for the viewers and listeners?
Stay tuned, right? We got more player breakdowns. Obviously, we got draft season kind of starting. It's maybe not in full effect yet, but definitely starting. Tons of player news and notes kind of coming out here through camp. So stay tuned for kind of the latest and greatest and how to decipher through some of the noise that's going to be coming out from the beat writers and the teams and the coach speak and all the things here for the upcoming weeks. But, as always, at Good Old Boys FF, hit us up. We're more than happy to have any sort of input that you may like, whether it's a trade, whether it's a draft, anything like that. But, we certainly appreciate it.
All righty. Well, guys, be tuning in as well. We've got the running backs 1 through 10 that we are rocking and rolling through here. Special episode coming at you tomorrow night there, as we finish off the player breakdowns here and really kind of wrap those up, and we'll start moving into those into some of those draft strategies. But that's going to do it for us. He's Kevin. He's Alex. I'm Derek. Have a good one. Be safe. Toodaloos.